Within your assignment, one of the absolutely critical things that you need to do is you need to measure success. And the way you're going to do this, I'll just give a couple of very, very coherent bullet points here. The way you're going to do this, or one of the ways, is you're going to, at the end of each week, you're going to do a write-up at the end of that week, at the end of the week. So you're going to do a weekly write-up. So what that means in reality is you are effectively going to do 6 lots of weekly summary. Okay, so you're going to do 6 summaries, or 6 times a weekly summary, which I promise you I'm going to spell well with a double M and everything. So what does this actually mean? Well, the first thing is that within that weekly summary, this is what we want you to be focusing on. Within that weekly summary, we want you to be describing your experiences of motivation. Okay, so we're going to take the concept of motivation and you are going to write about it. Okay, so we're going to take motivation and we want you to be reporting as a summary of your week of training how your motivation developed and you experienced it over the course of that week. So let's give an example of that. We're going to split motivation into 2 kinds. We're going to go over here and we're going to go over here, and we are going to describe one type of motivation as intrinsic, more of which in a second, intrinsic. And we're going to define one type of motivation as extrinsic, again, more of which in a second. And you really need to be kind of writing about both of these within your weekly summary, not necessarily sort of putting them into tables or breaking them down very, very obviously, but you need to be given examples of how you experience this. So first of all, what is intrinsic training? Intrinsic motivation, I should say. Well, first of all, it's about enjoyment. You know, a very obvious thing is how are you actually experiencing the training? Are you loving it? Are you hating it? Is it really painful to get up in the morning until you're convinced yourself you're going to get through it? Is it something you're feeling really, really driven towards because you're getting a good feeling off the back of it? Secondly, are you finding, or what is the level of kind of personal challenge? Now, this should really come from accurate goal setting and the fact that you've set your goals and that they've been achievable, realistic, but also exciting. Okay, if you're experiencing personal challenge and you'll rise to that challenge, that's intrinsic motivation. We've also got self-realization. Now, this is a term you may not have come across before, so I just want to detail this for you because it's a real classic thing that you can include within your weekly write-up. Self-realization, if I was to kind of to map it out over here somewhere, self-realization is realizing your own strengths and weaknesses. Okay, so if, for example, you're managing to combine, through doing your training program, combine your school or your college day, a part-time job, and doing your training as well, you might realize, well, crikey, I'm kind of a hard-working, high-energy person. Or you might find, look, I struggle to train in the mornings because it doesn't feel as good in the afternoon. This is a good self-realization. So this is what we mean by self-realization. And finally, guys, very much relates to that point, but intrinsic motivation comes about learning. Are you learning? If you're doing weight training, say, for your training program, are you learning about how your muscles operate? Those effects of exercise, those movement patterns that you've looked at, even how the muscle kind of responds to different intensities of exercise. Is this a form of learning? And that will, of course, be a form of motivation you will enjoy potentially. Now, extrinsic is different. Extrinsic are things like rewards. You know, are you getting, there's a W in there, are you getting some kind of feedback, reward? I'm going to use the word here, accolade. You know, for example, if your teacher says to you, hey, you're doing amazingly well to be at this point and you've done every single training session, this is extrinsically motivating because it gives you drive and makes you want to achieve. You might even say that to show your teacher, okay, is extrinsically motivating because you want that kind of pat on the back, well done. I mean, I know at your age you probably don't want that, but you know what I mean? You want that kind of recognition that you've done what you meant to do in your training. It can also include things like praise. Obviously, some of these overlap naturally, okay, so this praise. But also, if you're working hard physically and your body shape is changing and aesthetically you actually look better, you look healthier, you look stronger, say, this is also a form of extrinsic motivation because, of course, how you look is actually projected outwardly, okay? So that's really important. So within your weekly summaries, we want you to be touching on these things and describing how you're experiencing motivation. And it's normal, by the way, across a 6-week program that you will experience demotivation at times. But, of course, hopefully you will experience some of these things in the positive. Now, a couple of other points I want to get to within this tutorial. I want to talk about the benefits of motivation benefits of motivation and self-confidence. Okay, now again, this is really nice content for you to include. Self-confidence, this is really nice content for you to include within your weekly summaries, because you may well experience some of these things. Oh, I should have said a moment ago, by the way, the predominant thinking on this is that this one is actually more important than this one. You need both, but this one is really fundamental. Basically, people give up if they're not intrinsically motivated. Extrinsic won't do it by itself. Anyway, with that in mind, why is it important to be motivated? Again, can you include some of this in your write-up? Well, first of all, guys, it gives you a feel-good factor. Now that comes from sort of like I'm training, I get a natural high from the endorphins that I get when I'm doing it, but you get a feel-good factor. You actually feel good for doing this. Secondly, guys, you experience positive thinking. You may well notice this. I actually feel happier. I've got more optimism. Stress doesn't bother me as much. These things will happen as a result of motivation and self-confidence, and training can bring that. Not always, but it can certainly help. You may experience what I'm going to call up arrow increased drive. You might have more energy, more alertness. You might find that your academic studies are better. You're more attentive in class. You might find that you're kinder to your mum and dad or equivalent. In general, you're in a kind of a better frame of mind. We also find, and this of course is really important for our training program, you will get an up arrow, an increase in training adherence. Now you might be thinking, hang on, James, adherence, what the hell does that mean? Adherence means sticking to things. So if you stick to your training, your adherence to training goes up. It means you're more likely to turn up, complete your weekly sessions, do the training, in other words. We're also interested, let me choose an orange. We're also interested over here in the fact that a benefit of motivation is that you will meet challenges. Okay, so meeting challenges. So, think within the training program, you're doing weight training, say, or interval, and the last rep is a really tough one, and you're managing to push through it because you're motivated and feeling confident. Of course, that can help. And just a nice little simple one at the end. People develop what we describe as a can-do attitude, okay, when they are motivated and when they are confident. Okay, so within your weekly summaries, can you identify any of these experiences and report those in your weekly summary? Final thing from me, and very quick, I want to make sure that you realize of what the summary should do. So when you write your summary, the summary should lead to adaptations to training. Adaptations to training. Now, what do we mean by this? We mean that off the back of your summary, you should be prepared to change something about what comes in the next training session. So, for example, I've had a really tough week this week. I found it really boring just to be doing continuous training over and over again. That should lead to you including some fartlek. That should lead to you bringing in an interval training session. That should lead to you changing your continuous training to be running or cycling or whatever with someone else, a partner. You've got to train it. You've got to change it if that's your experience. So, why would we do this? To ensure commitment. In other words, if there's an issue, especially of motivation, and you don't make that change, that adaptation, there's going to be issues with commitment. Sessions are going to start getting missed. And secondly, guys, look for this notion. I've mentioned it a couple of times, of variation. Okay, off the back of your weekly summary, can you incorporate variation of activities? Let me make my writing a bit clearer. Of activities and method. Okay, so that one I just said about incorporating some fartlek as well as some continuous is actually a nice example. And why? Because we need to prevent what we describe as tedium. Tedium is this kind of demotivated boredom, burnout type thing where we go, I don't really want to do it today, so I'm going to miss it. Variation helps to avoid that, and we should have the fact that we adapt based off the weekly summary, the motivational experience, the intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, and so on. By the way, one of the adaptations you could make would be to incorporate some extrinsic motivation. I'll let you think about that one. Cheers.